You had a $13 billion valuation and a brand people trusted for 16 years with Grammarly. What framework should an executive use when weighing decades of brand equity against this radical pivot?
I wish there was a clear framework. The definition of what is people's jobs is just fundamentally changing. If you think that the people interviewing at your company are not using AI during that interview, you're just kidding yourself, right?
How do you lead when the unit cost of intelligence and execution is heading towards zero?
Those who make the transition most quickly will survive, and those that don't are going to have a challenge. Your job has never really been about writing code. Your job is actually something higher order than that.
So you recently mandated that the hiring at Superhuman require live AI fluency demonstrations.
Once you get that realization, you're like, okay, I'm going to need to adapt the interview process to not stop this, but to encourage this. Let's go the other way. I want you to use AI. In fact, share your screen. Show me how you're using AI.
If you had to give every CPO in the world one piece of advice that would make them uncomfortable, what would it be? Welcome to the AI CXO podcast series. This is a new series that we've spun up, and I'm your host, Amit Fulay. I'm really curious to know how this AI shift is playing out in the real world, and these conversations are really meant to get your insights, learnings, things you're struggling with as you both adopt and really make the shift along with your teams. And so there's a lot of pontificating about how to use AI, but this is folks really in the arena. And so I'm really pleased to welcome Noam, who's the CPO at Superhuman. Welcome to the show, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with, a reality check, so to speak. You build personalization and YouTube for millions of users, and you led AI at Meta before stepping in as CPO of a company that pretty recently rebuilt its identity around AI. And most legacy leaders, I don't know if that's a good term, but most leaders today are still trying to add AI to existing workflows. So from your vantage point, Noam, what are the biggest structural mistakes you see them making? And what does it actually mean to build an AI native org?
It's a great question. And I think some of my previous accolades maybe a little bit overstated. I didn't lead AI at Meta, but it's okay. We don't need to get super specific there. But maybe to your question, I think one of the most common mistakes that I see is, you nominate someone kind of the AI transformation leader, you create some kind of top-down mandate and initiative, you report to the board that there are these activities and kind of you're spending money on these kind of new tools. But I don't think actually transformation really takes hold or change really takes hold, because I don't think that it can happen kind of fully top down that way, one person, one mission. It's a much more, I would say, nuanced, organic, and kind of combination of bottoms up and top down kind of platform need to kind of change how you work, because it's not just about kind of getting everyone to use a particular tool. Oh, yay, all my PMs are using Cowork now. That means we're AI native. I don't think it's quite that. I think it's actually something much more fundamental, which is very challenging to wrap your head around and very challenging to kind of exert the change management to get it to work differently. But I think that the definition of what is people's jobs is just fundamentally changing. What does the team and the business actually need from you as an individual and a team member? That is completely being rewritten and being changed. And I think we're seeing that happen most acutely in the world of development, because that's where AI, for several good reasons, I think is, since kind of last November, has reached the maturity and level of transformation that it is now getting developers to rethink what is actually their job. Is your job to write code? Despite the fact that yesterday's tools had you writing code for most of the hours of the day, your job has never really been about writing code. Your job is actually something higher order than that. That's a reckoning that's happening now in real time, and you see that shift happening very, very quickly. That same sort of transformation is coming for all of our jobs, but I just don't think it's as widely distributed, and we're not forced to kind of look it in the face as directly as, oh my gosh, the model can now pretty much write good code for almost any like coding task I can put in front of it. We're not there yet in other parts of work, but it's coming clearly.
And what changes are you making? Are you seeing? Give us a sense for both like bottoms up, how it's been happening at your company versus things you put in place.
I think there's just a lot of like teaching people to fish, right? I think kind of getting them over the learning curve of, these tools aren't that hard to use. They're not that scary. Yes, there are some like kind of new concepts, but you're all very smart and you can kind of learn these new concepts. I think with a lot of teams, my first goal is just get you to the point of the learning curve when you can start teaching yourself. And by the way, these tools and these models are really good at teaching you too. You can often just ask them and they will like help you along. So I think there's a lot of kind of bottoms up, work and training that needs to happen to kind of do that. Teams helping teams, people just sharing like kind of what they're doing, picking like kind of one tool stack and saying, let's just get really good at this tool stack. Cause that's another problem that happens here is there's so many different ways to do every little thing. You spend so much of your time just trying to like learn what this tool or that tool and how to like kind of combine them to get your work done. I think just starting like, let's pick one, let's get good at one. Let's show you like the number of things you can do with just this like one tool. Get people to the part of the learning curve when they can start teaching themselves, and then kind of set like kind of, I think, North Star goals that are attainable within like an aggressive time frame. So for example, with my PM team, we had, one time we had an offsite that's basically like, we're going to have 3 days and everyone is going to get past the learning curve on these 3 days. Kind of, okay, what's the next goal that's coming after that? Well, everyone is going to push code to production. Like every PM is going to be pushing, PRs to production. That's not a requirement today, but that's a requirement in a couple months. It's like, let's work our way up to that, right? And then that creates both the right incentive and I think also hopefully the right safe space where, sort of the learning things. Let's work backwards from what needs to be true for us all to, push code into production in a way that engineering is not going to freak out. And then like, let's go and do those things and enable all of us to do that. So I think it's a combination of those sorts of bottoms up and kind of top down goals that then kind of clear the path, but also create the more organic, pull for people that kind of want to do these things. And then all sorts of like other, like just share what you're doing. We have AI Friday. Like there's all these sort of like rituals that you can start to put in place. Just like, this is just a standard part of like how we're going to be working. That's the expectation. I think that was the expectation like early in last year, we're already seeing that. But I think that like with some of the more recent advancements, it's just accelerating, I think, what everyone can actually do end to end without, a huge amount of ramp up.
I really like that, which is like pick a hurdle, get everybody comfortable and trained, or get everybody to push code to production, just picking those milestones and steering your team towards that. I think that's really useful.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a move that is almost unheard of. You had a $13 billion valuation and a brand people trusted for 16 years with Grammarly. But after acquiring, merger, however you call it, with Superhuman and Coda, you changed the name. Walk us through, the conversations in the boardroom or in the C-suite. What framework should an executive use when weighing decades of brand equity against this like radical pivot?
I wish there was a clear framework. I'm not sure that there is in this case, but there was like a natural inertia towards this. And I think that strategy was like kind of quite clear to the board and eventually the company. And it was obvious that the strategy required a different container than the one that we had, right? So first of all, the Grammarly brand is not going anywhere. It's an extremely valuable brand that is still alive and well. But yes, it is now the name of a product and not the name of the company. And that's the change that was made. So there's a little bit of like a built-in hedge there, right? Like we're not throwing away that incredibly valuable brand. We're going to use it for everything that we can, and in fact continue to invest in it, continue to grow it, because we do think it has a lot of enduring value in many different spaces, and also gives us a lot of credibility for the things that we're doing on top of it and how we're basically extending Grammarly into a platform that can allow you to do much more than correct your words. And that's basically the new product that we have called Go, which is built on top of like Grammarly's foundation. So one, there's a built-in hedge. We're not getting rid of that. Two, I think that for a long time, it was obvious to the leadership team here that writing was a very valuable wedge into a much broader category. Even the idea when I think Grammarly was getting started that you could have a writing assistant, that machines could actually help you communicate. That machine assisted communication was obviously going to be a thing. I think back then was like not so obvious, obvious to the team here, but also it was obvious that that's not like the terminal destination, that
Mhm.
writing is this really good horizontal wedge into many different potential destinations. You can own a writing surface, you can own a communication surface, you can work on more knowledge worker workflow kind of other horizontal problems. Writing is a thing we do everywhere. What are things that are adjacent to writing that we also do everywhere? Coordinating. So I think that was always in the air, and there was an understanding that the Grammarly brand, although it was like quite good for the use case that it was in, it wasn't sufficiently elastic to cover the broader strategy. So when the strategy became clear that writing was going to be a wedge into a new type of productivity suite, that where we kind of picked off, applications where writing was central, document creation, email, communications, these other thing, an assistant that goes with you everywhere and helps you with writing, plus many other, writing related things. It became obvious that those were the things that we're going to do next. Then like, it's clear that you need a different name, you need a different container for that. And then there's like lots of very hard discussions, obviously, about like, what is the name, like what is the brand architecture there? Are we a house of brands or a branded house? Like all of these sorts of things. But I think that's generally how it played out.
And beyond the brands and the products, how have the cultures come together across these companies? And I'm sure you've learned from each other in terms of
Yeah.
AI tool usage and,
Yeah.
where everybody's in that journey.
It's a really good question. And I think that people really underestimate. I think so much of the time you like talk about culture and it sounds like just some fluffy HR thing that like we sometimes talk about, but is actually, I would say, the most challenging and also the most rewarding part of these sorts of combinations. It's challenging because, successful teams, like kind of teams that get to this level of success that Superhuman Mail did, that Coda did, that Grammarly Certain did, there's obviously the team feels there's some special sauce, and there is typically about the team and the culture and how they work and the decisions they make and so on and so forth that got them to that level of success. Most, 99% of companies never achieve this level of success, right? So, and then figuring out, what is special about each culture and how do we assimilate, that into this kind of this new culture so we're all better for it. And then what are the things that we're going to shed from kind of like the previous cultures is really hard work. It's really hard integration work. And I think there's like a method also to how you do that integration and how you bring that in and how you organically kind of let that evolve. And when you kind of say, okay, this is the cutting point now we're doing that. We're going to stop doing these things. And we've done the dance together enough. We know how this should work. It's both extremely challenging, but also very rewarding and I think very valuable. So with each of these things, like, we picked up rituals from the teams that we combined together. We picked up values from the teams that we combined together. We like, it's this really challenging but nice way to basically kind of get the best of each of these cultures and try to like kind of regularly reform that culture. And so I think for us as a company, really we treated that moment in October of last year where we released a new brand and so on as basically a refounding moment. It's kind of day one. And we didn't reset everyone's vesting schedule though, which was nice. We could also do that on day one. But I think that that's kind of like how you have to think about it. And with each kind of new company that we bring into the fold, there's going to be that sort of moment again of like, okay, what do we take from these cultures?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So HBR recently suggested companies need agent managers to oversee AI the way PMs manage software teams. And maybe we're not quite there yet. It's a bit premature, but we can all see some form of that future coming. I'm curious when you look at your organization or how an AI native organization would evolve? How do you see the roles, even the titles, the definition change? I mean, this is a top of mind question, right? For everybody who's in the workforce today as well as entering workforce.
I think we're already there for what it's worth. Again, I'll go back to what's happening in the world of engineering and how quickly that's moving. And if you basically look from between November, December of last year and just 2 or 3 months later, the roles are completely rethought in my view. So I think we're already there. It's just like the how it rolls out is slow is the real issue. But so I think about it a couple ways. One is I think that collapsing roles makes a ton of sense. In some ways, I kind of like always go back to the principles of how would you do this when the company was just like 5 people in the room. Like I've been fortunate enough to like several times kind of be in that situation. There's just 5 of us. Like how are we going to do this? And a lot of the principles from how you work in that environment, I think, are coming to how you work in much larger environments, because now the specialization needed to kind of do different types of work is really collapsing. And so in that way, the roles will also collapse. I kind of think like everyone in the organization, first of all, everyone's a builder, and you have to have that kind of that builder mindset. And the question is just like, are you a builder that's mainly oriented to building the thing, or are you a builder that's mainly oriented to selling the thing? That's it. And so I kind of feel, unfortunately, like we're waiting for the Googles and the Metas of the world to do this for us and change the titles and say everyone's like member of technical staff or something like that, and then change the hiring guidelines and change all of those things. Then everyone else will be like, okay, we'll do this now too. Now we have the air cover to do this. I wish we would do it faster and not wait for that. But like I would tell you practically on my teams, I am not looking at people that way. And it's much easier when you're spinning up new projects than to like, retrofit this into existing longstanding projects. And so that's where I'm starting first, right? Like, oh, great, new project. That project's going to work differently. There's going to be 3 people on that project. Their titles are all the same. Like, they're all building. Maybe one of them is a little bit more oriented to design. The one of them is a little bit more oriented to like what the customer needs. And one of them is a little bit more oriented to how am I going to build a system that eventually a bunch more people are going to build on and contribute to. That's kind of like the group. Go forward, right?
I love that.
And I think that's going to like come for more teams, I think more quickly than we imagine. But we just need to kind of build the scaffolding around it in order for us to kind of work that way, and that's developing quickly.
That's fascinating. You mentioned, are we waiting for some other companies to do it before we change the roles and the titles? I've thought about that a bunch too. Is when is the right time to make change, and do we go first? Do we wait to see how it evolves? But I think your point about starting on new projects, maybe a clean slate, that's probably easier, to bring that in. And I think that's a really good cue to just start experimenting with that.
Yeah. It's hard not to like kind of ask these sorts of questions and think, oh, these are a distraction from building. And in a lot of cases they do cause a lot of distraction, right? Like not everyone is bought into this idea that these roles are going to collapse. It's this very scary thing. Like I get it. So there's like a lot of change management, a lot of people management that needs to kind of go into like, making that transition smoothly. At the same time, like I believe pretty strongly that like those who make the transition most quickly will survive, and those that don't are going to have a challenge. And so I think that the question is like, how do you do this in like a supportive but fast way to bring people along and kind of get your team into the new orientation? And sometimes just having a few new projects where you're like, look how well it's working there, and like those people are really happy, and like this is what they're learning, and like look at how they're working. Wouldn't it be awesome to? And then you can kind of quickly infect the rest of the org. Sometimes that feels like it might feel like a slower way to do it initially, but actually in the limit actually might be a faster way to transition, because I think people really benefit from like seeing the model play out, not necessarily in their backyard before they accept it.
Something they can point to. That's really
Exactly.
good. So you recently mandated that the hiring at Superhuman require live AI fluency demonstrations. I think that's a massive shift. When you force a standard like that, what breaks internally? How is that going for you? And what exactly does a world-class PM do that AI cannot?
First part of the question, I think the things first of all that force this is, if you think that the people interviewing at your company are not using AI during that interview, you're just kidding yourself, right? You can tell people are thinking about a question quite a long time. What's going on there, and it just immediately feels stupid to resist that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, isn't that exactly the sort of person you want to be hiring, that will like be trying to use all these new things to do things in a different way? You can call it cheating. I'm sure we used to call using a calculator cheating. Like, it's clearly not cheating. It's, if used in the right way, it is like how you level up. So I think you like, once you hit that realization, you're like, okay, I'm going to need to like adapt the interview process to not stop this, but to encourage this. Like, let's go the other way. I want you to use AI. In fact, like, share your screen, like show me how you're using AI. And like a Y Combinator did.
That do you get
Sure,
candidates?
sure. Yeah, sure. Y
Nice.
Combinator did a fun thing recently around this, where in the latest like application process for the class, they asked people to basically share one of their agent traces, like share one of their prompt histories, like show me, have this conversation, and I will evaluate how kind of like, AI native you are at this point, right? And so I just think it's just like, it's how I would want you to do the work when you're here. Why wouldn't I want you to like show me that you could do the work that way in the interview? And so like, what breaks is basically, it's just like any other time you think of new interview questions. You have to like, get the team aligned. Like, what is the new question? How do we evaluate what's good or bad? How are we going to change the interview process? How are we going to get this to scale, given like how many people we're interviewing? It's those sorts of things, but those are just like kind of mechanical things that you can figure out. And it actually kind of makes, interviewing even more fun. Like, like you're learning on the interview as well. And I think that it produces better results and better interviews. So that's kind of, and in terms of like how it's going, I think it's going well, but we are still like kind of tuning those questions and kind of tuning those evaluations. And we'll
Um,
be calibrating on that for a long while. Um, in terms of like your other question of like kind of what can a great,
Before you jump into that,
yeah,
I'm curious, and I'm sure a bunch of our listeners are going to be curious too. What kind of questions do you ask? Are you able to share any question?
I don't believe in secret questions. Like, I don't, there's like, anyway, I don't want to, I could spend so much time on my like hiring and interviewing philosophy. I won't go there. Well, maybe I'll just like briefly say, like, I prefer the styles of interviews where we, as best we can, simulate what it would be like to work together. Like,
Mhm.
my dream version is that everyone does like a month's trial, and then at the end of that month's trial, each side decides, do you want to be here, do we want you to be here? I mean, that's, in my view, that's the best. It's hard to scale, but that's like the best version. It's certainly how I would like to interview for a job. But we can't do that yet for a number of reasons. So what's kind of short of that? Well, let's find ways to simulate what it's like to work together, right? So it's usually we'll give you kind of case interviews or those sorts of questions where we ask you to like express your PM work, right? Like, let's build something. Let's create a prototype. Like, walk me through your thinking. How did you build it? All of those sorts of things. And so it's a lot of those sorts of cases, and we try to pick cases where it's not home court advantage for us and not home court advantage for the other person. So we usually will pick like like a thing that everyone understands. Like, let's build an AI native task tracker. Like, how would we do that? Like, if there's a PM out there that hasn't used a task tracker, I'd be surprised. Most PMs like kind of have a decent idea of like that world and what are the different pieces of software in that world. We do too. Great, it's common ground. Let's build an AI native version of that, set to some goal, and kind of see how that goes. That's part of the interview process.
All right, jumping into the second part of my question, which
Sure.
by the way is a great standalone question. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you're breaking it out, which is what does a world-class PM do that AI cannot?
It's a really good question because every time I kind of think about these things or answer these sorts of questions, I just wonder like how much of it is like human cope. Like,
And how long before your answer ages, right?
yeah, exactly. Like, I think the taste debate is a really good one. I think that I still do think that there is built up kind of intuition, product instinct, and taste that can generally guide your judgment if you've also like are regularly checking that intuition with, as best you can, either like customer interactions or data or whatever you use to basically turn your intuition into something more rigorous. But that I do think that, a world-class PM could still get to the right answer in fewer experiments than AI can. Um, the question is like, is the number of experiments really the thing that matters anymore? Is that like the limiting factor in a world where, cost of development or cost of producing software is zero? And, if you have sufficient traffic, the cost of testing ideas is also zero. So, but I still do think that there's something there. There's taste and judgment that I think is very important. I also think like a world-class PM, and this is what I mean. This is not just about PM. This is now like kind of everyone's responsibility. I don't think the bottleneck for a long time has been like how much code we can write. I mean, you've worked at big companies. Do you think that the bottleneck at Google is like how much code we can write, or the bottleneck at Meta is how much code we can write? No, that hasn't been the bottleneck for a really long time. I think the bottleneck is still how do we decide what to do and get it aligned enough that we actually understand what we decided and then get everyone to do it, right? And I think that world class leaders of all different functions are really good at that. And I think still better than AI at making decisions on what to do and then getting a group of people to run in that direction and produce the thing at the kind of the right alignment and fidelity to like what you decided to do.
You've talked about the model to pixel approach for building AI products. I've heard this come up from a few other folks. What does that model to pixel execution loop actually look like on your teams? Do you have any frameworks to kind of make sure that you can still do it with speed and it doesn't outpace kind of strategic judgment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that and this I think this also is evolved over time, and different problems I think require different solutions here in terms of like how close to the model you need to get. But just to like express what I mean by that, like you could run something like Grammarly with off the shelf models and just kind of make calls to online models. You could do that. It would be extremely expensive, never scale to the usage of Grammarly from like a cost and latency and user experience perspective. And what you would have to charge for that product, no one would ever pay. And so it's just a great example of, Grammarly does, I can't remember the exact number. It's over 100 billion kind of like LLM calls like per week. And if you break it down to like our users, it's like the average like 3,000 per user per day. Most users are not using ChatGPT 3,000 times per day or making 3,000, separate queries per day. And when you're trying to build a product experience that meets that sort of model requirement, you do have to kind of work like model to pixel. Like even the like when do the underlines appear? They appear as you're writing. There's a certain amount of delay. There's just the right amount of delay, so you can like keep writing and kind of take a break, and then they show up. How do you get that to scale for 40 million daily active users for a product that charges what we do per per month? That's when you really have to build model to pixel, and you have to take like that product experience that you're trying to deliver into account all the way from the pixel to what are the changes and what are the underlying models that I need, and how do I need them to work in combination in order to do that. In many other cases that we're building, it actually comes down to building more of a really good agent harness, where then it's like a little bit less about kind of manipulating the model in the same way that we have to for that Grammarly example that I gave, but more around context management and kind of what tools are available and kind of what is the right way for the tasks that we're trying to allow the user to complete. What is the right harness to build that will utilize a model of choice, whatever model the user wants, in the right way to do that. And it's a different type of building, like model to pixel. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I think to your question then about like how does kind of like our team process change around that? I mean, I think it's actually standard, good kind of like development along a model. I would expect like kind of PMs to kind of do their initial evals themselves, start getting a feel for how the model might behave and perform for the tasks that they're getting as they sort of like kind of build that understanding and they start to converge and hone in on a solution, how do we kind of scale that out and do more at scale evaluation? Like we have internal tools and ability to basically do evals at scale that Grammarly has built over many, many years with really good testers and raters. And then of course, from there it can kind of go to experimentation and you kind of can also A/B test your way to the answer. So it's that sort of kind of standard evolution. I think that like what happens when you have several reps at that is that you start getting, I would say, more of a feel of the art of kind of how to work with these models of like what is the thing that you're trying to build and how much like outside the capability of the model is that thing to kind of hit that sweet spot of like you will be able to do that very shortly, but it's not so outside of the capability of the model that the thing you're proposing is just like still many months away. Thankfully, that's like moving faster and faster, like as the rate of the model development is getting better and better. And so I think that's some of the other intuition that you start to build and learn as you work with these things.
Our North Star question on this show is, how do you lead when the unit cost of intelligence and execution is heading towards zero? If your competitors have access to the same frontier LLMs that you do, where does durable competitive advantage actually come from? And this is the question on moats and your thoughts.
I would add to that the question of anything can be copied very, very quickly. So, what's the mode? And I do think that it comes down to things like distribution and ecosystem and, kind of creating network effects that benefit kind of multiple parties from the usage of your application and of your platform. I also think things like brand, really, really matter a lot in that environment. And I'm very happy with our new one.
Branding.
Sorry?
I said, glad we touched upon the branding earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Those are the first things that kind of come to mind. I do think that like, look, the thing about building applications like a document editor, all in one workspace and like, an email application, the thing that kind of helps with your writing is that these are all applications that are in categories where people have like real preferences. And like they're the things that we live in every day that we spend a lot of time in every day. I don't think we're going to stop spending a lot of time in those things. We will have like kind of many more applications that are built just in time, bespoke for like a particular need. But like when we need to go talk to our teams online, we're kind of going to go to like, we want a place that's familiar, that we like how speaking to our team in that environment feels and works. We're going to be writing documents. We're going to be writing them a lot more with the assistance of AI, but like we like, everyone just kind of has their preferred choices and preferences in some of these things. And so I think that's where a lot of the edge comes in. And you can say, oh, well, I can look at, whoever is doing, let's see what Craft Talks is doing. Great. Let's like copy them and like do the same thing. Well, they're doing that and that's working for a particular audience. That might not work for your audience. Right. And so that's where I think like some of the, what's your distribution? What does your customer base look like? What is your brand? What are you known for? Who is your ICP? How do these sorts of judgments and taste decisions for at least the sort of software that we build, how do they align with what those customers want? And like, how does that affect our growth? Different categories of software, I think, will have like kind of different requirements to kind of stay relevant.
You've also mentioned, that every PM on your team is now accountable for revenue, not just shipping, and they're managing AI agents alongside humans. This requires like a massive unlearning. And then what are the specific mental models that today's C-suite execs and product leaders must completely abandon to successfully shift from what I would say panic to strategy?
It's a very deep question. I'm trying to figure out like kind of which direction to take that in.
What to unlearn?
What to unlearn. I mean, I think that long-term planning is one of the first things that comes to mind. I think that that's something that we should really unlearn. It's interesting. I think that some people also throw out strategy like out the window when they kind of throw out long-term planning, and I don't think that's correct. I think that having a strategy and still a perspective towards not only what destination I'm trying to go to, which is just half of strategy, but also how am I going to get there, which is like a big part of strategy. I think throwing that out the window completely in these sort of situations is a bad idea. But I do think kind of throwing out longer term planning. I do think that having ways to, in a constructive, healthy way, regularly reevaluate the strategy based on what you're learning. Look, I think in these sorts of situations, almost all that matters is rate of learning. Like just speed of iteration and speed of learning. How quickly can the organism like kind of figure out like the match between these are the people that have this problem and we have found a solution that they're willing to pay for. And that is like constantly shifting and moving in the environments that we're in today. And so I think really optimizing for rate of learning rather than like stability and predictable roadmap and, et cetera, is the right thing to be doing. And then I think working around that, saying, okay, if what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to increase my reps, increase the pace of iteration, what are the systems that I need to build around that where we all operate like right on the edge of chaos? And sometimes it feels like chaos, but it's not all chaos, because that usually most people don't deal with that too well for like too long. But I would basically kind of rethink the operating systems of the company around this idea that all that matters is rate of learning in every department. Yeah.
I like that. Just optimize for rate of learning. Now, let's assume if you were advising a Fortune 500 executive who's kind of feeling overwhelmed with AI and they're trying to transition their legacy company into like a true native AI organization, what are the two or three things you would just ask them to do? Whether it's small tactical things, big things, whatever comes to your mind.
I think the very first thing that I would ask them to do is it is impossible to really understand this stuff until you really start using it. And I would tell them if, like, they're not comfortable doing that on their own, hire someone immediately that's like their AI concierge, or something like that. Someone to actually just like sit with them and be like, I'm going to follow you in your day. And like, okay, we can use it here. We can use it here. We can use it here. Let me show you how. And like actually hands on keyboard, do it. It's like building with a new material. Like you don't understand it until you actually like try to use it for something that's relevant to you and important to you, where you care about the outcome of it. And I think that is a requirement for even thinking through, how am I going to change how everyone works, or how we work in order to do that. I think the next thing I would probably say is similar to what we did before, which is businesses are usually always doing something new, right? Pick something new that you're doing that doesn't have already kind of baggage, that doesn't already have like the trappings of the old world, like kind of keeping it down, and just choose that kind of like that thing. We're just going to do this one thing very differently. And let's think differently about what the roles are. Let's think differently about what the week to week for that project looks like. Let's pick something that is kind of net new and do it outside of the normal fold. Like think about it as an incubation that like you're then going to point to once you figure out how to do that thing successfully. Say, this is what we learned and this is how we work differently. How am I going to apply that to kind of other parts of the organization? I think that like just through a couple of reps like that, you start to really build intuition for like kind of how this should work and what it's capable of and what it can do. And then it's easier to apply it to like, okay, what are the customer support issues? What are the marketing issues? What are these issues? Like it's easier to apply that sort of thing. And maybe the last thing I'll say is, maybe the third thing is, that journey that I just described for the CEO, each one of their leaders should be doing that journey in some other part of the business, so that like these things are happening in parallel, and it's not like kind of a waterfall approach to
You
making
could do it recursively in your organization. I love that.
yeah,
Love those.
yeah.
All right, Noam, to close out, we always want to leave our audience with a challenge. And if you had to give every CPO in the world one piece of advice that would make them uncomfortable, something they don't want to hear about, what would it be?
I would say go back to being an IC immediately. Whether that means like very literally go back and do an IC job,
Yeah.
or whether that means like you need to be spending some decent portion of your week doing IC work in this new way. If you have a shot of picking up these skills and then also having an idea of what your team should be doing and how they should be spending their time. So that'll be my piece of advice is everyone should go back and be an IC as quickly as they can.
CPO to ICs. So we'll leave it at that, Noam. Thank you. Thank you for your time and sharing all of your learnings and insights.
Sure.
It's great.
Yeah. It's my pleasure.